This is Red Ice Radio. From the dream to reality. RedIceCreations.com.
Welcome friends and listeners from around the world tuning into Red Ice Radio. My name is Henrik Palmgren and we are coming to you from Scandinavia. Our website is RedIceCreations.com. Today we are going to tread into the territory of Comet Elenin and discuss its possible effects on Earth together with Andy Lloyd, who returns to the program. Andy is an author, researcher, artist and chemist. He is probably best known for his book The Dark Star, which establishes the facts about Planet X in a clear and understandable way. And his work on the subject of Nibiru has become essential reading for anyone who has studied the theories of Zecharia Sitchin. His website is darkstar1.co.uk. And comets have been a foretelling of doom in history, so there is much anxiety floating around about Comet Elenin. Many are expecting a catastrophic event in 2012, probably much thanks to the movie of course, but this is linked now to the ideas of Comet Elenin in one way or another. What will it bring with it as it comes closer to the Earth later this year? Stay with us as we explore these ideas together with Andy Lloyd. It's great to have you with us once again on Red Ice Radio. It was in the early days of the incarnation of Red Ice Radio that we had you with us, and we're looking forward to talking more with you today about your work and obviously Comet Elenin as well. Welcome back, Andy. How are you today?
Oh, I'm feeling absolutely fabulous. Thanks, Henrik, and it's lovely to be back on your show. I thoroughly enjoyed being on it, some years ago now, and looking forward to getting into a terrific debate about Comet Elenin and Planet X tonight. Absolutely.
Comet Elenin, Comet, as they say. We are in for an interesting ride, it seems like. I've heard so much buzz, obviously, about this out there. People are concerned, freaked out, they're excited, some are, bored, just as usual. How is your approach to Comet Elenin, Andy?
It's certainly captured the imagination. I think if you just go onto YouTube and pick out, do a little search on Comet Elenin and pick out any of the videos that are popular at the moment, it's quite remarkable just how many people are watching this and taking attention, and the comments that are being thrown around about this. It's creating a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, and worries that this is comets have always been down the centuries, sort of foretelling of disaster. I mean, that's part of our sort of mindset that comets are sort of a sign of impending doom, and I think collectively Comet Elenin has provided us with a taste of that sort of concern about comets, and in some ways not with no reason. There are some good reasons to be concerned about it in terms of the sort of movement towards 2012, the anxiety about the return of Planet X, and so on. So it's captured the public imagination, and although personally, as a researcher, I am not dragged into the worry about it sort of being a dwarf star or what have you, which I will discuss at some length later. The anxiety that comes with such a body coming into our solar system and just having so many sort of symbolic things attached to it, I can see why people are worried about it. So I do want to talk about that tonight.
It's going to be coming closest to the sun on, I've heard a few different sources, September 10th or possibly even September 11th, symbolically heralding the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, of course, and then closest to the Earth on October 16th, 2011, if I have those dates correct. And what I've been seeing so far in terms of some of the ongoing catastrophophobia, I think, if you will, Andy, out there, is obviously about people who have been matching the various alignments that the comet has been making with other planets, in our solar system, and then pointing to the fact that there have been earthquakes, there have been a number of, basically weird anomalies connected to Earth changes, if you will, or effects here on Earth. Why don't we just talk a little bit about that briefly first? Is that something that you have noticed as well, or is that due to something else? What do you make of it, Andy?
The concerns about that, I think, arise from some academic work by a PhD researcher whose name is Mensur Omar Basic. I hope I've got that pronunciation right. He did a PhD out in Canada, I think, and is currently living in Sarajevo. And he produced a paper that has been published in the States. I think Stanford University Library holds it, their online library. And in it, he discusses hyperresonance and he has found correlations, or believes he has found correlations between seismic activity on Earth and alignments between Earth and various planets and Earth and the moon. So during certain alignments between Earth, Sun and Moon and Earth, Sun and other planets, he has looked at that data and he thinks that there is a statistical sort of evidence there that suggests that some of the earthquakes we experience are connected with those alignments. Now, things like planets over the other side of the sun, from a purely physics point of view, conventional physics, there is no gravitational effect, one would assume, that would be able to create such an event here. However, he has proposed this theory of hyperresonance, which he thinks is some kind of gravitational lensing effect, which causes the seismic events we have experienced on this planet. So, in terms of Comet Elenin, in his paper he discusses Elenin, and the actual alignment, the first oppositional alignment, when Elenin was on the opposite side of the sun from us, took place around about sort of 14th of March, and that was in relation to the Japanese earthquake and tsunami on the 11th of that month. He thinks that there's a correlation, and a lot of people have picked up on this thought. Now, what's very, very interesting on a scientific level is that his theory can be tested, and you can make predictions. So if other comets appear in the solar system, and at the point where they reach opposition, and if we have major earthquakes occurring here, then, you know, a pattern is produced. Now, he already thinks he's found a pattern, and Comet Elenin fits in with this. But from this point onwards, we can make a predictive sort of some predictions. And the interesting thing about the way that the comet moves around the sun and the Earth moves around the sun, they do this little dance around each other, is that there will be a second opposition point on the 22nd of November of this year. And if Comet Elenin, if it's a comet, and if it survives its perihelion passage around the sun to get to that point on the other side of the sun once again, if during that period of time, say a few days on either side of the 22nd, we have another major earthquake, then I think his work starts to take on a little bit more serious quality, really.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, I'm very interested in what he has to say. I'm not a big fan of a lot of the other things that he has on his website and so on, but, you know, from a purely scientific point of view, he's produced a theory, it's testable, and, you know, we just wait and see what happens on the 22nd of November as to whether something else occurs during that time.
Absolutely. So this has to do with hyperresonance. Another theory, I guess we can talk briefly about, maybe, Andy, is obviously the electrical universe theory overall, that there is if you will, a discharge happening between different planets when we have foreign bodies coming into a very tightly locked system, if you will, like a solar system. These cometary bodies, according to the electric universe theory, carries with them, obviously, a charge, if you will, and that it can also act as a mediator between different planets. Hence, we might see effects on one way or another when this body comes close to us. What do you make of that, Andy?
A lot of people down the years, I mean, you know, I've been writing about this 10, 12 years about the brown dwarf idea, which, you know, has got a lot of traction these days, I'm glad to say. And a lot of people have written to me down the years and saying, look, Andy, you know, the electric universe theory is just perfect for your theory because it explains why this object that you've been describing could have evaded detection, how it could still have a major impact on the solar system without necessarily being something that was immediately apparent. You know, something that's quite dark and yet comes into the solar system and potentially causes havoc. And you know, I'm open to the idea that there is some sort of plasma effect connected with celestial bodies. I mean, we don't understand planetary science so well that we can dismiss this kind of idea out of hand.
That's right.
I would have to point out, though, that, you know, we send probes to comets. They land on comets. They collect samples. They collect information from the tails of comets. Comets, from my point of view, are as solid as the world upon which we're living. However, that is not to say that in the coma of comets, or the plasma that's generated around magnetic fields of planets and so on, that these kind of effects may not be taking place. And indeed, when I discuss, you know, the dark star, the brown dwarf, the kind of effects that it might be having on us now or in the next year or so, and in its ability to interact with the very extensive magnetic field of the sun, these kind of electric universe effects and field effects may well be the kind of things that we need to be concerned about. They may explain effects on the sun. They may affect effects that we experience here. So from my point of view, I don't say, no, I don't believe it. But on the other hand, I think you can also, from a Newtonian point of view, just say, well, comets go around the sun and they're solid bodies. And, you know, in the same way you can hold Newton and Einstein together and they're saying different things, but they both kind of work on their own separate levels. I think maybe the plasma theories of the electric universe have a similar sort of thing. You know, you can look at them and they address an effect as well without necessarily you having to discard what's come before.
What do we know about Elenin or C2010X1, as it's called, the name that NASA, I think, has given the object? What do we know so far about it in terms of size and composition? I've heard a lot of different theories out there already, obviously, about the difficulty in predicting actually how large this is. And I've heard stories about the fact that it's already begun to have strange effects on us, although it is already as far out there still. Which implies that it might actually be bigger than NASA or some of the other space agencies tell us. How about that, Andy? What do you make?
I think one of the things that first strikes me about Elenin, and some of the things that have been discussed on the internet as well, is its name. And people immediately are struck by the first three letters of its name, which is ELE. And, of course, there was that Deep Impact movie some years ago where Ellie was described as the sort of secret that the White House was keeping, and it was talked about in hushed corridors and so on. And it turned out not to be a woman, because I think someone was concerned someone was having an affair or something, but it turned out to be Comet Elenin,
right,
which was the extinction level event. And here we have Elenin. Now, Elenin is named after the Russian astronomer who discovered the comet, and all comets are named after the person who discovers them. So the Russians is called Leonid Elenin, and that's just where his name comes from. I mean, it's either a remarkable coincidence or it's just one of those strange things that happens every so often that may have some deep sort of intrinsic esoteric meaning that comes out of somewhere. And of course, the first three initials of his first name of Leonid is Leo, and Leo is the constellation where Elenin has been moving through for much of the period, the first half of this year.
Yeah.
So that's bizarre to start with. And you were discussing the perihelion point, which was either the 10th or the 11th of September. And of course, Richard Hoagland has pointed out that if it turns out to be achieving its closest point to the sun on exactly the day of the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 event, then that appears to have, certainly from a human point of view on this planet, a remarkable juxtaposition, a remarkable coincidence.
Indeed.
So once again, we have two remarkable coincidences already, and people have discovered, as you've indicated, a number of other points where other alignments have taken place, not just with other planets and so on, but also I think with one of NASA's probes, as well, which is going to get reasonably close to it. So there appear to be sort of esoteric markers to this thing, where you look at it and you think, how many coincidences do you want before you sort of open your eyes and think maybe there's something more to this thing than just a snowball going around the sun, and so on. Now, if we were to look at it and say, okay, NASA's just saying, look, this is just a regular comet, and it's not actually a very exceptional comet. That's their take. If you look at that and you accept on face value what's being said, then we are talking about a comet whose nucleus is about 3 or 4 kilometers in diameter. It's got a very, very low magnitude. It's not something you can walk out even on a starry night and see at the moment. We might be able to see it in binoculars in September, October. That's again if it survives its perihelion passage, and it's going to get as closest point to us, more or less mid-October. And it's just not a very exciting comet. It's not like Hale-Bopp that was sort of, absolutely sat in the sky looking beautiful for months. It's not going to be like that. But people have obviously been concerned about the return of a brown dwarf, the Planet X body, for 2012, and a number of researchers have concluded, based on their own work with the Colburn Bible and so on, that we are due the return of this body, which I've written about. And Marshall Masters and Jacco van der Warp and Janice Manning wrote a book that was describing how this thing would turn up around about 2012, 2013 and have, some fairly colossal effects, Earth changes and so on. So, is Comet Elenin, a body like that might bring with it a cluster of comets, say, and Comet Elenin may be sort of the first warning shot, to let us know that something's on its way. This is what they're thinking.
Right.
And other people have said, well, maybe Elenin itself is a dwarf star or a black hole or some other kind of exotic object that, although it can have a significant sort of lensing effect, or it's actually quite a gravitationally dense object, and that's why it caused the Japanese earthquake. So, in other words, although it's very small apparently, it's very, very dense. It has a significant sort of gravity well attached to it, and that aspect to it is the thing that is of some concern, that Earth will pass between these sort of gravity wells of the sun and this dark star, neutron star, what have you, and that will be a big worry for us. So that's the thinking that's going on. And I'm, as a researcher, I try and sit back from that and look at that and thinking, okay, well, what can we discard? What can we say that's not possible? And I'm not very comfortable with saying that Elenin is a significant sort of Jupiter-sized body.
Right.
I look at that and I think of all the possibilities, I think that is the least likely, just simply because if you start to say, well, I mean, from just getting away from the fact that, why can't you walk outside and look up in the street and, it should be something, if it's that, then it should be something you can see. A brown dwarf would be a star as bright, if not brighter than Jupiter. It would be quite a staggering object. But even if what people are saying it's somehow cloaked or what have you, then that goes against, on a rational level, what Nibiru actually is supposed to be. When Sitchin talks about the return of the planet Nibiru, he's describing it as a red star or a red planet, and that it appears in the sky, it's anomalous. People point at it, they say this is the return of the planet of the gods. Well, then why are we talking about a returning planet that you can't see?
Yeah.
See what I mean? It doesn't fit with the mythology of what Nibiru actually is. So I look at that and I say, I think that's the least likely option. And although I don't want to ever rule anything out absolutely, I'm not worried by it. I'm not thinking I need to run to the hills because, a brown dwarf swinging around the sun is going to cause us trouble.
Yeah.
And the idea, I'm more interested in the idea that Comet Elenin in somehow has some kind of esoteric significance. The Richard Hoagland idea, I look at that and I think, well, coincidence. Maybe there is something to his argument. Maybe this is an intelligently controlled object that is simply not just a comet, but something that's perhaps artificial, that is there as a symbol to us to make us wake up and realize our place in the cosmos and so on. And that's an interesting idea. So, those, or maybe NASA's right, and maybe this is just a dirty snowball that's coming round and it might just sort of destroy itself as it goes around the sun. So I want to see what happens. But from my point of view, from the science, I want to see what happens on November the 22nd. I want to see if this chap, Dr. Omar Bashik, is right, and whether, an earthquake is the result of this thing swinging around to opposition again. Yeah,
absolutely. We'll just have to see, obviously. But again, this is a perfect object for everybody to, project either their fear or whatever they're anticipating on this. I mean, people are mentioning the blue or the red Kachina, Nibiru, as you brought up. It is a reflection of something else as well, though, on a deeper esoteric level. I do see that it's a signal, a sign of our kind of collective doomsday anxiety, and people are eager to kind of connect it either with the end of the Mayan calendar, either if you believe that this is 2012, or as Carl Kaleman stated, that it's actually on the 28th of October 2011, which actually makes this, again, more closer in that sense. If it's the closest to us around 16th of October, then that is fairly close in the calendar to herald that. But in that regard, there's other asteroids and other bodies out there as well. There's another one, YU-55, that will pass 0.85 lunar distances from the Earth on November 8th, 2011. So we have other things out there as well, Andy.
Yeah, near-Earth objects are a constant source of surprise, and I think it's sort of the fact that astronomers still find these objects when they're imminently approaching our planet is something that should shake us out of our complacency. And a lot of people look at astronomy and think, well, it's like most science, scientists have got it all figured out. They've got such powerful, when you have telescopes that can look right the way to the other side of the universe, 16 billion light years or 14 billion light years or whatever it is, and they look right back in time to the Big Bang sort of thing, then people think, well, if you can see that far away, you can see galaxies forming sort of 12, 13 billion light years away, then surely we must know what's on our doorstep. And this is the peculiarity of astronomy, is that our ability to look so far back and into such detail gives us this complacent attitude that we understand everything. And in actual fact, our solar system is probably 99% not understood at all, in the sense that the actual area that the planets are in, including these near-Earth objects and the asteroid belt and so on, is such a small part of the entire sort of area of influence of our sun, that people think, oh, well, they look at a textbook, in a school textbook or in a magazine, and they'll see the 8 sort of major planets, and they'll think, well, we understand the solar system. And the solar system is just this incredibly mysterious place that beyond sort of Neptune, we know almost nothing about it. We know that comets appear every so often. We know that there's this ring around beyond Neptune called the Kuiper Belt. But astronomers keep finding things about the outer solar system that are anomalous, they don't fit. They keep questioning and challenging our sort of ideas of what the solar system is all about. From my point of view, as a sort of the writer of the Dark Star and the Dark Star researcher, I still think there is a lot of mileage in the sort of scientific proposal that there is a significant Planet X body still out there to be found. They're looking for it. NASA have just released a video that's discussing WISE, which is their infrared space telescope, that has been able to find a lot of the asteroid and near-Earth object bodies that you're discussing there, Henrik. And it's also one of its major reasons for being put up into orbit and doing an infrared sky survey is to find brown dwarfs. And NASA don't make any bones about this. They're looking for brown dwarfs. They know that brown dwarfs are very difficult to find, and they need to have a very, very significant infrared camera to discover this. And they've put this video out, and they actually talk about, and they've, the people running the mission have talked about this quite frankly as well. They say, look, we're looking for a brown dwarf, and we're hoping we might even find one between here and the next star, something that's actually our nearest star is a brown dwarf. Now, they're not making any bones about this. And the sphere of influence of the sun is so massive that, say you had a brown dwarf discovered even half a light year away, it could still be in orbit around the sun, because the sun's, influence is that immense. And people don't appreciate that. They think, once you go past Neptune, that's it. It's, it's all, it's that you enter interstellar space then.
Yeah.
And NASA don't help, because when they talk about, say, Voyager or Pioneer going past what is called the heliopause, which is the sort of magnetic perimeter of the sun, they say, oh, well, it's going out into interstellar space. Well, in a way it is, but actually, in fact, it's just going further into the outer solar system. It will still be going through the outer solar system for another 10,000 years. So, this is one of the things you have to sort of combat when you try and put the ideas together that there might be a massive Planet X body still there to be found.
But in that regard, if we talk about Comet Elenin specifically, you do not connect that with being a brown dwarf or Nibiru directly, right?
I don't think I do, Henrik. No, I don't think so. For the reason that if it's only from the point of view of looking at the work of Zecharia Sitchin, and I wrote about a brown dwarf as the object that he's describing, Nibiru. But I've written and said, well, look, in order to have someone living out there, you can't have just a rocky planet out there in the middle of the void, because it's just not going to be warm enough for anything. It's going to be a frozen block of ice. And you need to have this dark star idea. You need to have a large brown dwarf, sub-brown dwarf object like Jupiter, but a bit warmer, that warms up a planet that species can live on and plants can grow on, and so on. And I go into some considerable detail with my theory. So what he describes as Nibiru is slightly different, but either way, it's still a planetary body that comes into the solar system and is seen in the sky. So if you then try and fit that into 2012 and say, well, look, it's here, it's coming now, then we should be able to see it, because that's what Nibiru is. It is a visible phenomenon. So I can't see the point of saying, oh, well, it's there, but it's invisible. That just seems like trying to fit the theory to the facts. Yeah. Where what we need to do is look at the facts and work the theory from the facts. I still think Sitchin's right. I still think that there's this body out there, and I still think that in the next couple of years, there's a very good chance, if that is the case, that it's going to be found. I just think it's a very long way away, because if it's not, then it's big. we should be able to see it.
See it, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, again, there's a lot of people speculating that the reason why NASA is looking in the infrared is because this is objects that is, either comprised of dark matter, or it's not visible for that reason. It's there, but we can't see it in our, the frequency range that we visually are looking right now, and things like that. Any credence to those kinds of ideas? What do you think?
Well, again, let's see what happens when this thing goes round. If it survives perihelion and it becomes an object as it comes round that is more easy to study, and NASA can get some better images of it, and if it's something exotic, then that should become apparent. I mean, there have been some rumours on the internet. One or two people wrote to me and said, look, Andy, take a look at this. This is a photograph of Comet Elenin in Leo, and there is this kind of lensing swirl around it that's the gravitational effect on on the surrounding stars and so on, caused by the fact that this thing's got some gravitational weight attached to it. And I personally couldn't see really where they were coming from. I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
But that people are saying this. They're trying to establish that there is some evidence there. And as this thing comes around in September, October, and it achieves perihelion and it moves towards its opposition point again, then during that period of time, September, October, it's going to be a brighter object. It's something that people are going to be able to study. Not just NASA are going to be able to study, but people with backyard telescopes are going to be able to study.
Yeah.
And if there is really something to this, then it's going to become more apparent. If NASA are trying to cover something up, for instance, then that's the point where people are going to be able to collate their own evidence, and we're going to be in a better picture to understand it then.
There's a number of hypothetical planets out there, obviously, like Vulcan or Tyche, Theia. You know, those that we think might be still out there, of course. And I also saw that on your website, Andy, darkstar1.co.uk. You linked up in your news section this interesting news about what NASA is terming as, you know, sometimes they say free-floating planets, sometimes they say wandering planets. And there seems to be a number of these out there, and that's just, to me, evidence of what you alluded to earlier, that we simply don't know yet the many of the mysterious objects, you know, that are circling around, not only in our own, potentially our own, you know, or around our own solar system, but throughout the whole galaxy. So there's a number of unknowns out there, and they might actually be more common than we think, right?
It's one of these situations that if you sort of on a starry night went out and had a look at the stars, and what you're seeing is all the stars like our own, which are, you know, thermonuclear charged fusion fueled stars that are bright and so on. Now, if you were able to flick a switch and turn on all of the brown dwarfs, then you would double the amount of stars in the sky that you could see.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's just one of those amazing facts. And, you know, people are waking up to this idea. Astronomers are waking up to this idea, because as they are able to look at these objects and study them more closely, and it's only recently they've been able to do that because they're difficult to spot by their very nature, they are realizing that there is an abundance of them. And therefore, they could be close to us, because there could be any number of them close to us. So some of them are, we don't understand entirely how planets are formed. We think we've got a good idea, but then as we discover these extrasolar planets, people realize that some of our ideas need work. And I don't think there's any actual theory on planetary formation that's mastered everything yet.
Right.
But the thing with these brown dwarfs is that sometimes they form around stars, and sometimes they're just amazingly close to their parent stars. Sometimes they're in very wide orbits, which if we have a dark star around our sun, it would be a very wide orbit, something that's, you know, attached to it but goes way, way out. And then sometimes they're just not even attached to stars at all. They've either been flung out of solar systems, or they're forming independently in stellar nurseries and are floating around in this interstellar space, not going around individual stars, but sort of moving through the cosmos just like regular stars do. And of course they could have their own planets, and those planets could be quite habitable and even quite pleasant places to live, because, you know, where we are on this planet, we're sort of bombarded by all these rays from the sun, which are very intense, ultraviolet and cosmic rays. And, you know, you could argue that those are exactly the factors that mean that our, you know, cellular structure breaks down over time, our DNA gets corrupted, we get cancers, we die. Now, if you're living on a planet that is in a more habitable environment, that's not being bombarded, that is effectively shielded from all that kind of rubbish, then, you know, what's to say that, you know, as DNA develops, it doesn't take on a sort of a less, you know, sort of mortal thing. So, again, these ideas fit well in with, you know, Zecharia Sitchin's ideas about the Anunnaki and so on. And what I've really enjoyed, really, as on a personal level over the last few years, is where some of these ideas look really sort of wacky and far out, say 10 years ago, science has kind of caught up with them a bit. And I think as the new discoveries have come out, it's become clearer that there is some real possibility that these kind of ideas may be for real.
The Oort cloud, you know, which is claimed to birth a lot of the comets that come our way, of course, is also hypothetical. We don't know that much about it, and much in the same way we try to, you know, explain dark matter in our universe. The Oort cloud is another one of these things that scientists have reached for in order to try to explain. But again, we as you mentioned, Annie, we simply don't know at this point, and we're learning all the time. And I think that all this at the end of the day is reflecting our fact that we are, we don't have that much intelligence when it comes to actually what is happening out there in the solar system, and we're just beginning to look out there now with different kinds of instruments, and all kinds of surprises might be out there for us. The question is, though, if we go back to the symbolic value of Elenin again, what it says about us, of course, and about our fears, both collectively, that this is a lot of people who have, in some regards, a lot of the time on their hands, are sitting around on the web and obviously speculating, and this is just kind of catching on, if you know what I mean, without really that much data behind this. A lot of this is hypothetical. That's what I go back to anyway, and we simply don't know yet. We have to see, and wait.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you could turn that around and be a devil's advocate and say, well, if you're just skeptical about everything and you never actually explore some of these ideas to find out whether they're real or not, then maybe one day something big will come along, like the near Earth objects you were discovering, and people are just complacent about it because they think, oh well, it's not going to be a problem. I mean, I think it's worth exploring these ideas that come out of the internet, just simply because if they turn out to be right, then it's got such a profound significance for our planet and for our species that, we're fools to ignore it, So being overly skeptic and just saying, oh, that's all just rubbish, let's just not even look at that, and I'm not interested in that because it's just stupid. That's fine, but you're not taking into account the fact that the cosmos is actually quite a dangerous place, and our solar system is actually quite a dangerous place, and our planet does get hit by stuff, and it's probably been hit by stuff more than a lot of people give credit for, and that catastrophism has been a major player in our species' existence and in our Earth's history. Earth, for instance, I think it's about 600,000 years ago. 600 million years ago, rather. Was just a snowball. It was catastrophically an absolute snowball. And I think personally that the Earth's orbits has varied over time. At some points it's further away from the sun, some points it's nearer, and that's had a profound effect on the climate. That might be tied in with this dark star event. So going back to sort of Elenin, yes, you're absolutely right when you say that a lot of people have got the sort of Y2K fever, millennium fever, where, 2012 is around the corner. They're expecting almost something profound to happen could well be catastrophic. Yep. You can understand that because the Mayans, or certainly the Aztecs, used to talk about the end of age being associated with, volcanoes or earthquakes or so on. I think the end of the fifth sun's supposed to be earthquakes. You get these massive catastrophic events that occur occasionally here. The Japanese earthquake is mind-blowing, the impact that's had. And, if you take that kind of tsunami event from Japan and you increase it in scale significantly and make it a sort of an impact from a comet or something on a grander scale, you don't have to get much worse before you're taking out not just a small part of a country, but half a continent. Yeah. And I don't think, as somebody who's studied catastrophism, that people should just be as complacent to think, oh well, all these people are just talking rubbish and should not be worried. On the other hand, there's a balance to be struck, and I have read comments made by some very sensible people out on the internet who are scientists and so on, who deplore the fact that there are people encouraging fear and saying, I think this is a very, very bad thing because there's some young, easily influenced minds out there who have got an interest in science, have got an interest in the cosmos, but who are now scared out of their brains that next year is going to be the end of the world, and feel the need to go and barricade themselves in a cave up in the hills. And I get that. I understand that. I think, people need to be aware of the possibilities, but also need to be aware that life goes on and, anything can happen to any of us at any time. And, we shouldn't sort of panic and, run into the hills. That's not really a sensible way to proceed. So there's a balance to be struck.
That's right. Well, I mean, when Comet Hale-Bopp what was close to the Earth, was it in 96 97?
Yeah, I think it was 97. Yeah.
Yeah. The spread of the web was obviously not that prominent as it is today. So the whole thing is kind of turning out to be kind of a social experiment as well.
That's true. That is a very interesting point. Yeah.
And the question there, of course, is if they're then again, I go back to that idea, what it says about us and our doomsday anxiety, if you will, Andy, the fact that we seem to have this incorporated into us, and it's a part, obviously, of many religions, is a part of the older, doctrines or, the calendars, if you will, of some of the South American tribes and so forth as well. Other Native Americans have this as well. So it's kind of, it's in there, it's entrenched. So this is kind of bound to bubble up to the surface, if you will, when these kinds of things happen. And I think for the first time, maybe then, we have all these people who can share their thoughts and comment about the videos that are online in a way that we've never seen before. So it is kind of a reflection of the state of the human mind, if you will, as well. Andy, what do you think?
I agree with you, and I think you've got an absolutely excellent point there. And in some ways, actually, I think it's a positive thing because, Halebot was associated with that Heaven's Gate cult, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Where there was this sort of sect mentality, and a group of people believed they're sort of Messiah type prophet chap, and believed that there was this UFO associated, and they're all going to get taken up, and then they had that terrible tragedy connected with that. Now, if something like that was to happen connected with Elenin or with a possible Planet X, or the rumours that swirl around about these things, that would obviously be an absolute awful tragedy as well, and that is to be guarded against, frankly. But on the other hand, having the internet available for people to talk about their fears and to discuss them and hear other people's opinions, skeptical viewpoints and so on, helps to ground the worries and ground the fears, so that you can say, look, we need to be aware that things do hit this planet and that there are risks and that we don't know everything. And, we need to be alert and aware of those possibilities. But on the other hand, having the people who are there also saying, oh, don't be silly, there's just nothing to worry about, you don't need to get concerned. It helps to ground that. And, perhaps the internet is a means of preventing people being sucked into these cults and sucked into these very closed, rigid ways of thinking around charismatic people, and it enables people to, consider these ideas without being sucked in too much with them. Well,
that's a good idea. I mean, I think a Marshall Applewhite, if you will, of today then, and his Just Do It Nike mass suicide campaign that he was running in unison with. I mean, it's horrible, but I mean, on some level, you gotta laugh about it too, And hopefully, I think that something like that would be exposed, if you will, for the joke that it is with the web today, and well, we can never obviously prevent a cult from doing whatever they're doing, but at the same time, maybe less people would be sucked into it, if you will. So there's always a positive and a negative side to these things. You're right, Andy.
And these cults do exist out there. We don't hear too much about them. They do exist. And I get the occasional email from people who said, oh, I know, because I'm researching this field and people want to hear, what's going on. And they'll write to me and say, I'm aware of, a relative of mine is involved with this and I'm really worried about them, and they talk about, your kind of subject and they're really worried, and what do you think? And I'm able to describe, some of my sort of thoughts on the matter, which they tend to find quite reassuring. But when I hear about these stories, it does make me realize that these sort of groups do exist, and there is a mentality there that can be fed upon by people who are quite cynical sometimes, and want to draw, generally charismatic people who want to draw a following to them. Now, I don't count in that category some of the sort of more mainstream people out there who are writing about Planet X. I think if the more open you are about your beliefs and the more discourse you have with people, that the less, even if you're quite extreme, even if it's sort of American talk radio shows that are quite, politically biased and so on, at least you're open about it. At least people are having the forum to talk about it. It's the ones that we're not hearing about, the people who are out living in a commune out in the middle of nowhere, who are talking about the return of Planet X or what have you. Those are the ones to worry about. That's the fear, really.
What do you make about government or in cahoots with various space agencies covering up the true data here about Elenin, and that they are withholding the potential severity about the situation, because either, this is an opportunity from their point of view then to cull the herd, as many people speculate about, or simply that they do not want to bring, attention more to the phenomena, for the fact that we might be going for some kind of catastrophe because of it, but from their point of view, they simply withhold it because they think it's going to happen nonetheless. There's nothing we can do, so why cause the trouble about it at this point? Anything to that at all? Would they withhold information, do you think?
Well, I think on the first thing, the kind of people who are out there who sort of are in NASA or the sort of lower stretches of government who might be writing on this subject or trying to lay people's fears aren't exactly the people who would be in the loop of anything major like this occurring anyway. So, we use this over sort of umbrella word for government, and that sort of implies that everybody who works for the government is therefore part of a major conspiracy.
Right.
And I don't buy that.
There's so many layers.
Exactly. The vast majority of people who might be working for the government are as oblivious to what goes on as any of us. Governments have secrets. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Some of those secrets they can keep for 50, 100 years, and quite frequently do. And, every January in this country, in the UK, there are files released under the 30-year rule or the 50-year rule or even the 100-year rule, and embarrassing facts come out that no longer will affect anybody who's even alive anymore, and you realize that these secrets are kept for decades.
Yeah.
So governments can keep secrets, and Stanton Friedman writes about this in some excellent books, and you read anything that he writes and you come to realize very, very quickly that secrets can be kept. So that said, when we're talking about an incoming dwarf star, you have to keep that in mind. Yes, they could keep a secret. Yes, Deep Impact could be real. Yes, they could know that something's coming in. They don't want us to know they have the Norwegian seed depository and all this kind of stuff that people talk about. They have the South Pole telescope, and they're keeping an eye on it in the sort of the cold areas where they can use infrared to spy on this thing. Yes, those are plausible ideas. However, when you're talking about a thumping great big planet that's approaching us, and it's supposed to be here within the next few years, it goes beyond the simple remit of being kept secret by government, because, you or I could buy a half-decent telescope, set it up in our back garden on a good night, spot this thing. And, if that's the case, then you have to say, well, in reality, it cannot be there because we should have seen it.
Right.
So this is why people start talking about, lensing effects and supercooling effects and blue dwarfs and God knows what, because they need to sidestep that issue and say, yes, the government is keeping a secret. It is there, but, there's this exotic thing attached to it in order that makes it. And I can't go there because, as I said, it's not in keeping with the mythology that's affected that you originally pick up in order to try and say, there's a Planet X body, because, as we've discussed already, it should be visible.
But is at the same time, though, could that mean that we're limiting ourselves to the mythology because we're simply looking for that object when there actually could be a number of other things out there, which is simply unknown and unheard of in terms of previous civilizations on this planet, or the current one, Andy?
Well, that's a really, really interesting question, and actually one that I've thought about an awful lot. And my answer to this is, Sitchin may be wrong. Sitchin's whole, I'm sort of well into his stuff, very interesting. I think it's a genius work, and I'm looking forward to a conference a couple of weeks' time to do with his work, because he's a genius. He was a genius, rather. But let's say he's wrong. Maybe he got it completely wrong, and that all of the Sumerian things were just all myth, and he's misinterpreted it, and he's looked at it, and he's come up with a really interesting idea, but he's just plain wrong. That said, even if he is wrong, that is not to say that there is not a Planet X in the form of a brown dwarf or a Planet X in the form of a substantial planet, and that's not to say that it is not possibly habitable. You could have those two situations. You could actually have this planet existing, and there's actually quite a lot of indirect evidence that suggests that there is something out there that's substantial. You could actually have that object and Sitchin still be wrong. That could just be one of the quirky, bizarre things about the universe and about our place in it. There may not be the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki may not exist, or they may not have come from the Dark Star or Nibiru, but that doesn't mean that this object's not there. And out of interest, Carl Sagan wrote a book about, I think it's about 1980, 84, something like that, called Comets. And he wrote it, he co-authored it with his wife, and they obviously discussed the same kind of things we've been discussing, which is, that the comets are harbingers of doom and so on. And for centuries, people looked at comets and thought, oh, that's it, there's going to be pestilence and woe. And he describes the fact that, actual fact, it's possible that comets seeded viruses to our world.
That's right.
And that the viruses cause disease, and that there was actually a correlation between the appearance of a comet and, say, a new plague. That's an interesting concept. But in that book, he also, for about 2 or 3 pages, describes the Dark Sister. Oh dear, that's my phone. Sorry about that.
No worries.
He describes the Dark Sister, which is... he describes the Dark Star. He's talking about the Nemesis object that is a myth on Earth that describes, the sun as being the sort of overriding god, but it also has this dark sister that's out there and it can't be seen, but, it comes every so often and creates calamity, and that there's this myth. So even Carl Sagan discusses this. And I think that the mythology there is... It's something within us. It's deep within our collective unconscious. It gets tapped into by various researchers like myself and many others. And there may be a reality to it. And even if there isn't a reality to it, there may still be something out there.
What do you make of some of Hoagland's ideas then, in terms of this being intelligently guided? It might necessarily not mean that there is... a rocket engine on this thing, or even, life on it per se. This could simply be something that's been propelled towards us, if you will, on the path that it's currently on. Is there any, as far as you are concerned, evidence to support this claim?
Well, as we were saying earlier on, I think the number of coincidences associated with this object make it outstanding in terms of drawing our attention to it. The potential perihelion point with 9/11 is quite remarkable, and some of the other things that he's described as well. I was listening to him on the Project Camelot sort of Comet Elenin forum that we did, and he was. Richard Hoagland is a very persuasive researcher. He is capable of communicating ideas very effectively, and I was quite taken with some of his ideas. I don't want to rule that out at all. His previous work with anomalies on Mars and on the Moon indicate to me that there is potential ET contact, that there may be monuments in the solar system that our governments may be aware of, that, our ability to understand these things as regular, normal people on this planet is somewhat curtailed by the fact that we don't have direct access to this information. It is fed to us. And there may well be anomalies out there that have some sort of ET thing. Now, if that's the case, I don't know who these ETs are. I don't know if it's some sort of super secret government here that's capable of creating these sort of esoteric symbols for us to wake up to and realize our place in the cosmos. I don't know who's doing it, but again, he's produced such a corpus of work down the decades, and some of it is just so remarkable that if this is just another sort of piece of the jigsaw, then that's a fascinating concept, and I was quite taken with what he was saying earlier on. The only negative thing that came to mind was, we were discussing during the conference the fact that, and this ties in with something else you were saying earlier on as well, the fact that this comet is supposed to come out of the Oort cloud and has been drifting towards us from a very considerable way, but its orbit is not really very well understood and could change, and different people have very, very different, different astronomers have very different conceptual understandings of what the orbit of Comet Elenin is, whether it's something that's, just got hundreds of year orbits or millions of year orbits. And, I think a lot of that is based on the idea that it's coming towards us in this hyperbolic orbit, it's moving towards us, it's kind of being recaptured by the sun and flung around into a new orbit. And we talked about that a little bit, because that is probably how most long period comets work. They come out of the Oort cloud if it exists, or they're interstellar comets that come close to the sun if it doesn't exist, and then they're perturbed by the sun's gravitational influence into this sort of new orbit. And at the moment, what we're seeing it doing is it's in limbo. It's being affected as it's moving around,
right?
And that state of flux means that we're not able to really understand it as well as we think we can, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely.
And astronomers look at it and they say, well, we won't really understand its orbit properly for another epoch, another period of time within, when all the planets in the solar system have swapped around a little bit more, and we've seen how it's moved around in relation to them over a period of time, how it's moved around the center of the solar system. We'll have a better idea in the future. So again, you look at that information and you look at the claims made for the various alignments for it that are coming up. And you just have to sort of be aware of the fact that this is a changing picture.
And even so, the solar system and the universe, I think, is not the Newtonian clockwork, if you will, that we once believed it was. There are very many different variables that I think are unknown to us, and this could, touch upon some of the resonance effects as well. This could tap into the quantum level of things. It could even tap into the fact that humankind and our own consciousness is actually affecting these bodies as they come closer to us. We have no idea if we are, keeping truly an open mind about these things as well. So I think things change all the time, if you will, and in our solar system and in other parts of the system as well. So for us to be able to pin exactly everything down, it's pretty much impossible, I think, at this point.
I think the only thing you can be sure about with the universe is you can't be sure about anything at all.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and when we study cosmology and when we look at the various different theories that come out, the universe almost allows us to understand it in various ways that actually aren't mutually compatible. Now, that's just totally bizarre. And I'm rather skeptical of them ever really finding a theory of everything, because I think the universe actually, in some way, is built to be mysterious. It's built to evade understanding, at least on a human level, even with our sort of advanced mathematics and our supercomputers and so on.
Well, that's right. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Andy.
Well, just to reflect on what you were saying there, we don't really understand how much consciousness can affect how the universe works. And I think that there are a number of researchers working in this area, a large number of researchers work in this area, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. Field theories and consciousness and how the whole thing interrelates. And I think we've got an awful lot to learn about dimensions and all these things. And science, needs to keep an extremely open mind on this subject.
Absolutely. And I also think that things are geared towards the fact that it potentially is trying to evoke a sense of mystery in us in that sense as well. And I always said I don't think there's an objective, ruler, if you will, in that sense out there that is doing this or other things in the universe in accordance to evoke a specific thing out of us. I think that, as Hoagland has done, then being able to pin down a lot of the symbolism around this and the meaning surrounding the comet, it doesn't explain it away, and it doesn't truly explain everything of it as well. I think again, at the end of the day, it's for us to read whatever we want into it. We are creating the meaning when we're discovering it, if you will. And I think that we can do find these patterns, if you will, all around us. We can find them in many of the things that are in our solar system, on this planet, around in our own lives. The only question is, do we put that much focus on those things as well? So I think it's there for us to discover, and it doesn't disqualify it as being meaningless, but we read the meaning into it, if you know what I mean, Andy.
Yeah, and I think that is an intrinsic part of being human. I think that's where we're at. I mean, human focus in finding patterns, it's what we've been doing since we came out of the caves and so on. And I think if we didn't find patterns in things. If that wasn't part of our nature, then science would never have occurred in the first place, because, you know, the ability for a scientist to discover a pattern and then correlate that to a law, that's what they do.
That's right.
So if people like Hoagland are saying, look, you know, I've spotted this, and this, and I've done a statistical check on it, and this is statistically improbable or even impossible that this is, you know, just random, that there has to be some sort of correlation. There is, you know, a pattern here, and look at it. And not only that, but the pattern that I'm seeing has a profound significance in terms of our experiential knowledge of the universe. And that profound thing, that is, I think, the thing that makes a distinction between paranormal research and more purist science, in that things that occur in sort of the paranormal universe tend to have some form of profound significance. People will see a UFO, they'll see a ghost, they'll have some sort of experience that changes their lives. And from that point, they realize that the universe isn't quite what we're led to believe. Yeah. There's more to it. And trying to study those subjects, ufology, ghosts, psychic experiences, telekinesis, psi abilities, it's very, very difficult to find a scientific correlation that explains what's going on. But on the other hand, despite science having tried to get to grips with it for 100 odd years, especially psi phenomena, and haven't only ever been able to say with psi phenomena, well, you know, there is something going on there. And actual fact, the thing we do agree on is the more somebody believes in it, the more likely is to be a psi effect. You know, that's the only thing they've ever really been able to agree on. That level of profundity, that profound effect, is the thing that makes most people who study the subject realize actually there's something to it and you shouldn't dismiss it.
That's right.
So, you know, with Comet Elenin, coming back to that, when you have that kind of alignment connected to it, then you look at that and you think, well, you know, like seeing a UFO or like seeing a ghost, you could just sort of say, oh, well, you know, don't worry about it, it's nothing. Or you could actually look at that and think, that is actually a door to our understanding of the whole entire universe. And somewhere in between, there's reality.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in other words, let's study it. Let's try to understand the phenomena in that sense. And maybe this is not the reason to, you know, hide out in your bunker with your canned food in that sense. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that to have a bunker and some canned food is not a stupid idea either at the same time. You know what
absolutely.
I mean? So you have to have the balance. And I agree with that. And again, Andy, we just have to see what happens here, if anything, then in September, October, when that comes. But you know, in any regard, what's your hunch, if I put it that way? Then, do you think we'll see any effects? Do you think that we will see increased earthquakes or other types of phenomena in September, October here, Andy?
Well, if Omar Basich is right with his hyperresonance theory, and it manages to achieve its opposition, then from his point of view, I would have predicted November the 22nd, and that week around about that point would be the time that I would be looking for. Hoagland's ideas with the alignments, I don't think are meant to be something that we are supposed to fear. In actual fact, he called it fear porn, I think was the phrase he used, which I think is rather good. And you know, he's got a point. I mean, I'm a catastrophist, so I'm a little bit more sort of wary of dismissing this stuff. But, you know, from his point of view, it's positive. You know, we should look at it from a positive point of view. So, yes, those dates that he's describing, where, you know, the comet comes close to the Earth, or the comet comes close to the NASA object, or it's at perihelion during the 9/11 10th anniversary. You know, if this thing makes itself known in a more sort of, you know, blows itself to bits or starts doing a bit of a firework display during those actual alignment points and makes itself obvious to us, then again, the significance of those dates and those correlations are sort of enhanced. So November 22nd, from my point of view, in terms of, you know, trying to understand whether earthquakes are related to these alignments with planetary bodies, that would be a fascinating date. And obviously, if anything awful does happen, that would be truly tragic and horrible. But from a scientific point of view, that there may be some sort of validity to it. But for me, I'm looking beyond those events now. I'm looking towards the end of next year, 2012, the end of the main calendar that's approaching on the winter solstice of 2012, which is, not that much more than a year away now, and whether there is something to do with the end of that calendar that is of profound significance for our planet. That for me is sort of oncoming tide mark, really, for this kind of research.
We are indeed in a time of kind of a nervous tension. Obviously, it shows how much on a string things are hanging at the moment anyway, and hopefully in that sense there is something to it in the terms of opportunity for some kind of transformation, or if you will, then Andy, some kind of waking up of a slumbering humanity, but at the same time not personally hoping for any kind of catastrophe to reoccur on the planet in that sense. But again, we'll just have to see, Andy. And obviously, you're continuing your work on the Nemesis, on the Dark Star as well. Why don't we just, as we begin to round things up here, then for this time, Andy, tell us a bit about your website, some of the things that you have on the radar currently, and of course mention your book that you have out there as well on the topic here, Andy.
Yeah, my website's Dark Star Theory, and you can Google Andy Lloyd or Dark Star Theory and you'll find it very easily, darkstar1.co.uk. And it's been going about 10-11 years. It looks at the question of Nibiru, Nemesis and Planet X, and is a relatively serious website on the subject. It's fact-based to a great degree. It's got a lot of speculative ideas in sort of mythology, but also there's a lot of science in there as well. And, one of my main sort of research interests is to try and solidify a lot of the speculation about a Planet X body, and to draw out from the sort of scientific body of knowledge the actual information, the facts, the evidence that may well point to the existence of this thing. And there is quite a lot of anomalies and other interrelated ideas that come from various theories astronomers have that mean that brown dwarf isn't a completely ridiculous idea. So that's my interest. And I think the next couple of years, not only have you got the 2012 thing from the sort of esoteric side, but 2013 around about that period is important as well, because this infrared telescope that I was talking about, WISE, which is a particularly potent and important telescope, it's done a sky search and it's mapped out the sky in infrared, but like trying to find any object in the solar system, it isn't just a case of looking at the light. You have to look at the movement. And infrared telescopes don't last a huge amount of time because they warm up after a time with the sun's rays and so on. And this thing only had a fairly short shelf life. Mm-hmm. But during that period of time, it's been able to snap the sky sufficiently, astronomers think, to be able to spot a significant object. So, for instance, say you just did a snapshot of the sky and my dark star's out there in infrared, it would be seen. It would be one of the stars, okay? Mm. But who's to say that wouldn't just be a background star? No one can tell one way or the other until you've done what would be, in the old style, a section of plates that you then transpose to see what's moved. Until you do that, you're not really going to be able to dismiss the idea of Nemesis or Tyche or the Dark Star or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I think the idea is there, and I think WISE may well come up with it. And even if it doesn't, there's still this question open of, well, it didn't really run long enough to be able to determine it. So there's that idea.
That's right. And if also, Andy, obviously, if something is heading straight towards us, then you wouldn't see that with the different plates, a time lapse, if you will, as well, right? The
only chance you'd have with that would be that light goes into redshift and blue shift. So something coming towards us would blue shift towards us. But then that's not to say that a nearby star wouldn't also be blue shifting towards us. And trying to correlate that exactly is tricky. And when you're talking about a very elongated orbit, if something is moving along that orbit, it's sort of along the long path, then by definition it is moving towards us, and it's not this lateral movement across the heavens is low. So that's a lot of where the dark star theory is, and a lot of people keep an eye on it and come and read it and read my articles and so on. And I wrote the Dark Star book in 2005, which was sort of not exactly a textbook, but it was in the form of a book, a presentation of my work. And really speaking, in the last 6 years, there hasn't been anything actually major that's come along that's shifted the fundamental ideas in that book. They still sound. But since then, I've also written a couple of novels which were focused on the idea of government cover-ups, the idea of, what if the government, we were talking about this earlier, what if the government does know about this thing? How would it try and keep it secret? How would someone try and break that out? The sort of WikiLeaks type idea, I suppose. How would you actually get that story out without it being sort of clamped down by the government? And going into the idea of, how would the government react if they knew that there was an alien civilization on the edge of our solar system? Would they try and explore it? Would they try and make contact with it? Would they go to war with it? So those books that I wrote were to explore those ideas, Ezekiel 1 and the followers of Horus, and to sort of, in a fictional format, try and understand some of those ideas, because obviously I haven't got any evidence that that's occurring, but, those ideas were something I wanted to explore. So that's what I've been doing for the last few years. I still love doing this. It's great research. It's a great idea. And there continues to be evidence that comes out of the woodwork every so often that makes me think, this really could be real.
All right. Take a look at Andy's website for more information. Darkstar1, the digit 1. .co.uk, and we will have the links up on redicecreations.com as well, of course. And we'll keep looking at the sky, following this mystery, of course. Thank you for joining us today, Andy. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much again.
You're welcome. Thank you, Henrik. Take care.
Part 2 of this mini-series that we're doing on Comet Elenin is available right now on redicecreations.com, together with Richard C. Hoagland. Don't miss it. And then later in the week, we have Christopher Knight and Alan Butler coming on the program as well. Also in the pipeline, we have David Hatcher Childress and Brian Forrester, Wayne Herschel, Alex Putney, Santos Bonacci, Jan Irvin, Nick Redfern, Robert Bovall, Hugh Newman, Penny Pierce, Kevin Annette, John Coleman, and Will Hart. Take a look at our members area on redicecreations.com for much more, but until next time, take good care and thank you for listening.